to do the 5 love languages. And I was standing here and I was thinking, I don't know why, but for a second I kind of was wondering what Ethan would be thinking sitting here right now with us. And so I decided, let me just set your mind at it. It's not going to be some mushy-gushy, lovey-dovey kind of a training session, okay? The first section of the series, which is tonight, we're actually barely going to even get into the 5 love languages, because even before we do any of that, we have to understand what is love. We also need to understand some key components that are important in any relationship. And what I've always recognized, and during my counseling and coaching, what I've always learned is that communication is one of the main reasons where relationships break down. And so tonight, the primary focus of this session is going to be, what is love? What kind of loves are there? What's God's intent for relationships between man and woman? But also, what is communication, and what is the significance of communication in a relationship? Now, as I reference relationship throughout the night, I'm not necessarily only referencing the relationship between a man and his wife. A relationship can be the relationship between Susie and I. It can be the relationship between my boss and I. It can be the relationship between Kelly and Jackson. Interestingly enough, as I was doing my research, something that I realized was that there's even the 5 love languages for toddlers. And I was like, this is awesome, because, and then also, as soon as I saw that, I went down a rabbit hole, and I was like, you do that with Anthony, I need to do that. But it's really interesting, because even though it's saying the love languages, really, there's only one of them really where you're actually doing verbal speaking. But as we'll learn later, a lot of communication, in fact, most of communication, a great majority of it, and I know we did that one time when we were having a communication class, but I think it's like 70 or 80% of communication is nonverbal, okay? So it's important for us to have a strong foundation before we even go into the series. So if it's not right away jumping into that, just bear with me, okay? Relationships take work. Who didn't know that? Okay, good. So we're all on the same page.
Amen.
I think it's interesting how, as humans, we know that in order to have an education, we have to work. In order to have a home, we have to work, both not at home, making it at home, but also get up, go to work so you can pay the mortgage. In order to have a car, you have to get a job, work, save, to be able to buy and maintain a car. In order to have good health, you need to work out, watch your diet. So everything in this life, basically, worth having, takes work. But for some reason, when it comes to relationships and when that initial stage passes, we just start taking each other for granted. We just assume it is what it is. Kind of like I got on the train and, I bought my ticket, I'm on the train, the rest of it should take care of itself, right? Wrong. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it should work. That's not the way it was meant to work. What is love? What do you guys think what love is? Well, y'all know me. I make this interactive. In fact, I'm not even going to sit up there. I'm going to sit down here. Okay? What is love? Kelly, what is love? There's no right or wrong answer. Give me your definition of love.
Come back to me.
Okay, Deshante, what's love? Everybody, think about it, because I'm going to basically call on everyone. Yes, Andy?
Putting someone ahead of yourself and caring about them before you do yourself.
That's love. Yes.
God is love.
Amen. That's good. That's right. Anybody else? Tell me, what is love to you?
I think love is like an action or a feeling that you can either do or you can experience and receive.
That is so interesting that you said action or feeling. because I hadn't thought about it that way, but really it goes into talking about the two ways that love is. And one is action, one is feeling. And that's very good. You just open up the door to the next. Everybody else are off the hook for now. Because that takes us right into the next part, right? So there's two kinds of love as it pertains to a male-female husband-wife relationship. It's the initial stage where we call falling in love. And a lot of times when I talk to couples, some of the complaints I get is that it's just not the way it used to be. In the beginning, it was this, that, and the other thing. But what happens? That period ends, you know? Well, the fact is, that kind of love is just a temporary love. In fact, a lot of times it's more of a interest/lust. It's not the true love. True love really starts once we get past that stage of being in love. I forgot my clipper up there. Oh, there's an agenda. So there's two types of love. It's the passionate one and the compassionate one. And just by looking at the pictures, you should get a general idea of what each of them means, right? Of course, in the beginning, you want to have this happy-go-lucky, kind of coy, shy. It's sweet. There's nothing wrong with that. But if anyone thinks that that's how marriage life specifically is the entire time, I think they're going to be in for a pretty rude awakening. Marriage is amazing, don't get me wrong, but it is not all like that, because that's not what life is. We live in a fallen world. There's other issues that you deal with, there's difficulties, there's bills to pay, there's illnesses, so it's not always like that. And so the two kinds of love that we have, and there's different terms for it, but what I'm going to reference is the passionate love and the compassionate love. So when you think of passionate love, right, you see the other person, your heart skipping a beat, and you go out to eat together and you can't get enough of everything they say. And quite frankly, a lot of times when we're in these passionate love moments, a lot of their annoying things that they do are even tolerable. Seriously, that's something that a lot of people tell me, well, I never noticed them about him, I never noticed this about him, or I never noticed this about her. Truth is, you just don't notice it. It's not that they didn't have those actions, but you were kind of blinded. When they say blinded by love, that's the kind of temporary high that you have. You don't notice any of that. That kind of love does not leave much room for growth, because it's not genuine. You're not your true self with each other. Even if you are, the other person's really not seeing your true self, because it's like a veil. You can be your true self with your annoying habits, but the feelings that they're experiencing are not going to see that the true self that you're portraying or showing them is really what they've been looking for. Then there's the compassionate love. Compassionate love, like I said, starts when the passionate love ends. That's where now you have room for growth. That's where in the past, if you went out to eat, you couldn't get enough of the other person speaking and you had so much to share. Compassionate love, you can have a deep conversation, or you can sit there in silence and just genuinely enjoy each other's silence. And sometimes Tony and I, when we go on a road trip, we'll have some of the best conversations. But sometimes we'll drive hours just holding hands. And that is just as nice. Compassionate love is when you are so settled in a nice routine where you don't have to remind each other of, this is what I need, or can you do this for me? You just do for each other. It just comes naturally. It's like pieces of a puzzle. And if you think that's just a fairy tale thing, it's not. Love like that exists. In fact, that's the kind of love God intended for a husband and wife. His intent from the beginning was for a man to have a wife. He said, I want to say in Genesis 2:18, said, the man should have a wife. You should have a woman. I'm paraphrasing, but that's something to that effect. So from the beginning, his intention was for us to be in such relationships. When you're in a compassionate love, there's also some things that aren't as rosy. During compassionate love, those annoying habits are annoying. Now you notice the person as who they really are. That's not a bad thing. That is not necessarily a bad thing. If they chew loud and that gets on your nerves, and that's a pet peeve of mine, so I always reference food-related noises, you notice it, you know? You're still nice about it. You don't snap at them necessarily, you shouldn't, but you are more aware. And because you have reached that stage where there's more that you notice about each other, and because that veil has been taken off, now you need to have more of an effort put in to make your relationship work. You see, when you're in a compassionate love, because it's feelings driven, you don't have that much control, okay? A lot of times that's why people will fall in love with the wrong person. They fall in love. You see, especially it happens with a lot of women who grew up with like an abusive father. You'll see them falling for an abusive or controlling man. And to some extent, of course, you always have control over yourself. But the feelings that develop, you don't necessarily have control over that. And so that's where I was telling Tony, that's where feelings come in. So passionate love, the in-love phase, that's when you don't really have much control and you just go with the flow. And so the highs are high, the lows are low, and you're just going with it. Then when you settle into the real relationship, now it's by choice. Now you have to put in the work. And that's not a bad thing. That really is not a bad thing, because when you put in the work, when you have a choice, when you have effort, that means you can influence. Now you can guide. Now you can communicate and see where it is that your relationship is going to go. So that's actually a really good thing. If you make it to that point with your spouse and your significant other, you're in a good place. Generally speaking, and this is not like written in stone for everybody, but between 6 months to 2 years is where the honeymoon phase, I guess, of a relationship lasts, the passionate love phase. We'll touch on that in a minute. Tony's told me that we're going to keep it to an hour, so let me know when we're like 5 minutes. Okay? So one of the things that matters when you're in any kind of a relationship, and I'm going to refer to it as the emotional love bank. When we go into the series, Dr. Chapman refers to it as the oil tank. But because I don't know enough about vehicles, I didn't want to use an analogy that would get me stuck, because there was too much explanation with how it affects the engine, and I was like, yeah, okay. Love bank. Everybody understands finances, right? Everybody understands deposits and withdrawals. I mean, if you have even if you have just a piggy bank, there's only so much money you can take out from it before you need to start replenishing it. So we're going to refer to it as the emotional love bank. Again, this is not necessarily a love relationship between two spouses. This is any kind of a relationship. In order for any relationship to thrive, the two elements in that relationship, the two people have to make sure that as much as they withdraw, they deposit. As much as the other person pours into you, you pour into them. Years ago when Tony and I got together, one of the things that we kind of touched on, but it also kind of automatically evolved in our relationship, is that I make his needs my priority and he makes my needs his priority. And right now, Anthony's needs are both of our priorities, so our needs are not so big. However, but everybody who's had children understands how that goes. So I get it, when you have children, that kind of is hard to navigate around, but we still try to do the little things. Where in the past, Tom would get up and make sure I had my coffee and breakfast every morning, Now I understand that's not gonna happen every morning. But there's still little things he does where I'm like, oh, that's sweet. There's a certain kind of creamer I like. Well, when I go in and open the drawer and the creamer's been replenished, that's a few dollars in my emotional love bank. Or when I'm out shopping and I see something, and Tony and I both like to eat, so a lot of the things we do for each other tends to end up revolving around food. Like one of the things I love to do is, no matter how tired I am, I take care of dinner for him. Now, it can be me coming home and cooking, or it can be me grabbing something on the way from work, but that's something that I make sure he understands that I am aware that a deposit needs to be made, and I make that deposit. That allows me to do a daily check-in with my husband. When you're with your spouse, when you're with your significant other, or really any relationship that matters to you, at a minimum you should do a few check-ins, but no longer than weekly. Don't go past a week before doing some kind of a bank check-in to see what the balance is with that individual. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Later on, as we go into understanding what each person's love language is and how you can make those deposits, right now we're just going to talk about the quantity, not necessarily the quality of it, what kind, right? But let's say my love language, if it is words of affirmation, my husband at least, like several times a day we'll tell each other I love you, but at least a few times a week he'll say things to me that are meaningful, compliments that are meaningful. Something that really, really, really means a lot to me is I try very hard to be a good mom. So one of the best compliments, something that tops up my emotional love bank, is something like a text he sent me a few nights ago, and he said, "You are such an amazing mommy." I was on cloud nine. So just saying you're awesome isn't enough. Guys, especially if you have a wife who jokingly, every time you say I love you, she says why. Look, we joke about it, but really, for us, especially as women, we're very analytical. If you don't explain what it is that you like about that person, it's kind of like you went to the gas station, you put the thingy in, whatever it's called, the gas thingy, I don't know much about hers, the handle thingy, but you didn't turn it up, you didn't pay for it, it didn't fill up. You went through all the motions, but you didn't necessarily fill it up. Okay, so when it comes to women, most women, not all, but most women were very analytical. And so Tony's learned it. Now whenever he tells me some kind of a compliment, he explains what it is that he likes. You're a great mom, you take great care of Anthony because you give him a bath every night. Oh, I love hearing that, Or I appreciate that you come home and cook. I appreciate that you do this. Make it genuine. When you're trying to fill someone's love bank, don't give them a fake check. Don't give them a check that's going to bounce. Because all that's going to do is backfire. That's only going to make them feel cheated. Now, to be fair, if your spouse is trying to make a deposit and they made an honest mistake on the check, don't assume they were trying to pass you a bad check. That's where communication comes in. So, if you have an expectation, if you're expecting your significant other or your coworker or whomever to understand and meet the needs of that relationship where you can have open and honest and genuine communication with each other, you have to give each other feedback. As a general rule, some ways you can make deposits and withdrawals into someone's emotional love bank. When you make a promise, keep it. That should be self-explanatory. But sometimes we get excited in the moment. And especially parents, when it comes to children, they have very good memories. Be mindful of the promises you make, because you might fill that emotional love bank of that child a little bit, but they'll remember it if you don't keep that promise. And that is very, very detrimental to their spirit. You do not want to do that. Now, sometimes you make a promise that you genuinely cannot keep. Don't ignore it. Even with a 3-year-old, you'd be surprised. I mean, Ania at home, she says and does things sometimes. At least twice a day, I tell Tony, I can't believe she's only 3.5 years old. Children are very smart. So as you talk to them, explain to them, okay, I know I promised we were going to go for a walk or go for ice cream or whatever, but for this and that reason, we're not going to be able to do it. Don't just break a promise without replacing it with something else. It's important for spouses, but God, it's so much more important for children, okay? Second one goes pretty much with the first one. Stick to your word. Again, when it comes to children, they watch us. They don't really, I'm sure everybody has noticed, the whole do as I say, not as I do, doesn't work with them. So be mindful, and if you give a word, and you expect your child to grow up to be honest and set the example. And so when you give your word, make a promise, stick with it. Loyalty. What is loyalty? You know what, I want to take a minute to speak about loyalty, because I think we misunderstand what loyalty is. Loyalty between especially a husband and wife means that you don't talk about them negatively behind their back. Not to anybody. Now, everybody needs a friend that they can vent to. Okay? Make sure the venting is not necessarily belittling your significant other. Your relationship should be so tight with one another that even if you're absolutely upset and you say something stupid, and I've been guilty of that, everybody's at some point might lose it. It should tear you apart until you talk to them and clear it up. Loyalty means even when they're not there, even when they're not going to find out about it, you're loyal to them, even to your friends. Something I will never do is crack any kind of a mean joke or anything. Some people will be like, they'll joke about their husbands or their wives. I don't trust people like that. If you will crack a joke about your significant other, the only person that time and time again in the Bible, God says, you will leave your parents to be with that person. That two become one, that you are to be of one flesh. If you cannot be loyal to that person, that means the true meaning of loyalty. Loyalty to your children means always placing their best needs ahead of your own. That also means some tough love. That's something that's really, really difficult. I understand that. In fact, a lot of times when something happens, and Anthony is only a year old, but, he'll want something or he'll want it now, and it's just so difficult sometimes to make that right decision. But if you're loyal to them, if you want the best for them, you have to overcome that. Loyalty is putting the other person's best interest near and dear to your heart and sticking with it, no matter how hard and how tempted you are to take the easier path. When it comes to couples, counseling does not fall in that area so much. Because when you're in counseling sessions, you are there because you genuinely want to make things work. You're not there to badmouth them. So there are times where you have to be genuine and honest about what's going on. So recognize the difference between badmouthing your spouse or mentioning things that you think need to be fixed. I just want to throw that little piece out there in case you're in counseling and you're like, oh, well, I don't want to tell the counselor he or she did this or that, because then they're not going to be able to help you. But if it's just idle talk, we should never, ever speak poorly about our significant others, unless we're looking to find some kind of a solution to a problem. Listen, apologize, follow up. When someone comes to you and talks to you, your significant other, anybody else you're in a relationship with, listen to what they're saying. Don't start forming up a response or an answer just so In Armenian, we say that just so you don't stay under the word, just so that they're not one up on you. Okay? Listen, genuinely, if you care about a relationship, listen to what that person's saying. If you need to apologize, apologize. But be sincere about it. If you don't feel like genuinely you need to apologize, explain to them. But also recognize that apologizing doesn't necessarily mean you're saying you're wrong. Sometimes it just means that the relationship matters more to you than your own little pride of whatever it is you're hung up on. Sometimes it's just not worth it. A few days ago, Tony and I were running out, and I figured, it's me, him, and baby, and we were just going to run to Walmart and Walgreens and go back. So I didn't grab the diaper bag. I made a conscious decision not to grab it. I just didn't think we would need it. And we're halfway down the street, and I said, I didn't grab the diaper bag. And he's like, what? We never leave home without it. And I could tell that this really mattered to him. Now, the whole time I'm sitting there genuinely thinking, it doesn't really matter, right? And where my former past would have sat there and argued with him that, look, man, we're 2 minutes from the house. What does it matter? I think I surprised both of us and said, I'm sorry, honey. And he kind of was like, he didn't respond. I said, I'm sorry, I think you're right. Next time I'll make sure to grab it. And I'm honest, I was even a little surprised. I was like, oh, that was nice. He said, I love you, baby John. I was like, scored. It was so easy. Why do we sometimes argue over stupid things? That could have led to, and I always use myself as an example. I can be very snippy, shocker. But sometimes, literally, it's not a cliche. Count to 10 before you respond. Because relationships are important. When someone, your significant other, says something to you, always imagine you're holding 2 pitchers in your hand. One of them has gas in it. One of them has water in it. And whatever they said is fire. What do you choose to do? You have that choice. They said something. They could have said something really, really bad. That was mean. You have a choice. That mean thing they said is the fire they threw on the floor in front of you. What are you going to do? You going to pour gas on it, or are you going to pour water on it? See, we can't control our significant others. We can't control our co-workers. We can't control the people we come in contact with. But with our reaction, we can influence the outcome of every situation. And this is as much for you as it is for me. I always try to remind myself, pitcher of gas, pitcher of water. What am I going to do? Am I going to light this fire up even higher just to show them that I can? Or am I going to pour water on it? What does God say? He doesn't say, blessed are the fire makers. He says, blessed are the peacemakers. Why is it that we know the word, but when it comes to real moments, we choose to do otherwise? Setting clear expectations. I don't want to be a genderist, but I feel like I need to address this more with my sisters. As women, we tend to, a lot of times, not specify what it is that we expect our significant others to do. I know I've made that mistake. Well, he should know. He's been with me for how many years now? He should know I don't like it. Look, men's brains work differently than ours do. Not all men and not all women are the same. But generally, men think differently than we do. So, without giving them too many words, we owe it to them to explain to them what our expectations are. But don't turn it into a long, drag-out conversation, because it can be misconceived as nagging. It's a fine line. You just have to know your significant other to know how to speak with them. So the way I would speak to Tony would be different than I would speak to Tom, my brother. Different men understand things differently, but giving clear and concise explanation of what your expectations are always helps in a relationship. We know to do that at work. When we hire somebody or when someone hires us, we give them expectations. We do check-in on a 30-day basis or 90-day basis. But we don't go through and do that for our relationships because we assume the other person should know. They don't. If we don't tell them, they don't. And telling them why you're screaming is not going to help either. People don't necessarily grasp on things that are screamed at them. In fact, the minute we start raising our voices, whatever argument it was, we just lost it. To remind myself of that. Ask about problems and respect others. Needless to say, everything that we're reading here that we should do, that does the depositing, the opposite of it is very detrimental because it withdraws, and at some point, it can push the relationship to the verge of bankruptcy. We live in a world where there's a lot of divorce and bad relationships. And a lot of times that happens because people are just too busy. Too busy to do what's easy and set it up correctly from the beginning in their relationships. And so they come together and that happy-go-lucky moment passes and then, 6 months, 2 years, whatever, and then they settle into their routines and at some point they become ships in the night, just passing by each other. That's not normal. Even though most of the relationships that we see are like that, that's not normal. That's not what God intended. You can have a happy relationship. Growing up, we were always taught the platinum rule, the golden rule, but a few years ago, I was in the military when someone talked about the platinum rule. And since then, that's become more so what I've strived to do. Treat people as they want to be treated. Because the way I want to be treated may not be the way Susie wants to be treated. One of the key things that the love languages talks about is just that. A lot of times we try to show people love the way we understand love to be. For me, love could be a nice gift. For Kelly, it could be something else. So understand the other person's love language. Understand what the other person expects out of any relationship. And sometimes that'll tell you if that's a person you even want to have a relationship with or not. Now, if it's your spouse, make it work. You've been together all this time. God brought you together. But for other relationships, especially when you first start dating, when you first start interacting with people, one of the things that you should strive to figure out is to see if you're compatible from that aspect. Not that you should both speak the same love language, but that the other person is willing to meet you halfway. I love this little chart. This is about communication. How many people have seen this before? Was it from that one time we were at the... Okay. Okay, so what happens when we communicate? In any kind of communication, there's usually two elements, right? You have the messenger and you have the recipient. The messenger puts out the information, which is the message, and assuming they're on the same channel, that they understand each other's language, okay? It gets transferred over to the recipient, they understand, they give you feedback. So I'll give you an example, okay? Ethan, you'll be my demonstrator. Just come stand over here. We just communicated. He understood what I was saying. I sent him the message, and I told him to come over here. He understood it. He received it. And then there was behavioral output. Now, go back over there. Turn around. Yung mga ko supposed to mama, kani kaya There's a break right here, right? I'm communicating to him. He's hearing it, but there's an obvious obstacle, right? Languages work that way, regular human languages. But love languages are the same thing, right? I was telling him exactly what I had gestured to him to do. I said, take a few steps forward and come stand closer to me. But he didn't understand that. Why? He doesn't speak Armenian. Thank you. Appreciate it. And demonstrated. I wanted to show that part because I really want you guys to understand, even if this might seem a little boring or cliche, this series is going to help you in your relationships because we do not realize a lot of times how important correct communication is in all of our relationships. We just assume people should understand what we mean. We tend to bring into any relationship our own socialization history, whatever we've learned, whatever languages we've learned speaking growing up, be it the verbal languages, be it the cultural at-home gestures or norms, and we bring that into the relationships, and we don't even half the time stop and think that this person grew up in a completely different culture than I did. And I don't mean necessarily Puerto Rican white American or Black American Armenian, or I don't mean that way. I mean, it could be literally me and my cousin. Both of us Armenian, but we still grew up in different cultures because each household has their own culture. So don't think of culture as necessarily like an ethnic origin or national origin. It's not like that. Recognize that even Todd and I, now that we're in different households, we speak different, we have different cultural experiences. And this is something that I wish I had really paid more attention to when we were closer, and we did have more of an opportunity to interact, but sometimes, in Armenian, actually I was Farsi, they said, whenever you catch the fish, it's still fresh. So some things, it's never too late to fix. Sean, you probably liked that one, didn't you? Anytime you catch the fish, it's still fresh. So it's important, even if you have relationships that you've kind of neglected or felt neglected by, that you go back and try to see if there's something that you could have done with shifting the communication style to see if you could work it. I know I deal with that myself a lot. What we're going to do during this series is try and discover our own primary and secondary love language. You can have more than one love language. Share it with our partners. And if you don't have a partner here with you, that's fine too. Recognize what it is, and one day when you do have a partner, then you can teach them. Or if you have a friend, or if you have a coworker or whatever, you don't have to go to work tomorrow, go to school tomorrow and say, to your buddy, hey, my love language is this. Amber?
I'm working on it.
Okay. For you to know your own love language, though, it's going to facilitate better communication with people with whom you come into a relationship, any kind of relationship.
You can also learn to understand and recognize what other people's love languages are once you know them.
Yeah. By their feedback. Goes back to the communication part of it. Thank you. Okay, we'll leave it on this slide. You don't even have to blow it up. We can just leave it at
Sorry.
Or blow it up, that's fine. Next week we're gonna take a quiz. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that today or not, but I think we'll do it next week at the beginning of this of the session. And we'll figure out what our primary and secondary love languages are.